here. Hi, everyone. We're doing a live for the Make Homeschool Safe Again Act, or Make Homeschool Safe Act. I'm just going live on Instagram, and I have I have a guest with me. So let's add him. Is with HSLDA, and so I'm adding him to our stage. There. Hi.
Hi, Sam.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
I can hear you great. Yeah.
I'll tell you that the tech on this is so crazy. Sorry, everyone. I'm turning up my volume so I can hear Kevin a little bit better. I'm going to adjust my camera just a wee bit. There. So the reason that we're doing this today is because I just got I got the newsletter, which I get, the HSLDA newsletter, and I recommend HSLDA to all homeschoolers. And I saw this write-up. I don't think it was your write-up. I think it was someone else actually who wrote up like what was wrong with the Make Homeschool Safe Act. And so I reached out to HSLDA and I said, would anybody like to come on and talk about this with me? Because I think people don't quite understand how egregious this, and it's model legislation. So maybe start there and explain to us what is model legislation, and then we can go into some of the particulars about what's wrong with this.
Sure. Yeah, first of all, Sam, thanks for having us on. Thanks for reaching out to HSLDA. Appreciate your support for homeschooling and for what we do. A model bill is basically a template bill. And so there is something called the American Legislative Exchange Council, and representatives from across the country come to that, and they hash out bills that they think would be templates that states may look to use in their particular state. So it's an idea at this point. This particular model bill, as far as I know, has not been through the ALEC process. It's simply, put out by CRHE. So, by contrast, we have a model tax credit bill that we put through ALEC. It goes through a robust vetting process. You have to have a state senator to support it. But this is basically the idea of CRHE and their version of what homeschool freedom or lack thereof would look like in the United States of America.
Right. And so the fact that it's model legislation is basically saying, hey, we've already written this. This is your template. If you want to make some minor adjustments to it, but we're trying to make it really easy for you. By the way, people, just so you know, a lot of news articles that you see are pre-written by people who have like a vested interest. So they pre-write the article, then they send it to a reporter and say, hey, would you like to report on this? And by the way, I've already pre-written it for you, so you can use it and maybe modify it if you want, or you don't have to. And that's sort of what this is. So they've pre-written this. So let's talk about what's inside this that people ought to be aware of, especially homeschoolers. And can we just say, they are after us because we are getting it done better than the bureaucrats can, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. This is it stems from a worldview. So when we look at this, we say, look, there are ideological adversaries that are totally against the freedom to homeschool that you and I would hold dear. And they come from a totally different worldview. They think differently. They don't trust parents. In fact, CRHE put out what they call a parental rights extremism guide. And if the title doesn't tell you enough, you can certainly read the content. But this idea that we have to work against this decades-long parental rights extremism agenda where people want to have the right to homeschool so they can, hide their kids and isolate them. And just nonsense, frankly. It just does not comport with reality. But it's the worldview that it stems from, and we've seen this in academia. If you go back to Rob Reich and, James Dreyer and, Elizabeth Bartlett from 2020. These ideas are not necessarily new. What we're seeing, though, is, you recall like the Shiny Happy People, the Amazon, Prime, you remember Homeschool Nation. We've seen this stuff come up in recent years, and this is the latest iteration. And the scary thing is it's getting a little bit of traction, actually, in some legislatures across the country. So, Sam, do you want me to run through a couple of provisions of the bill? I won't cover the whole thing, but I'd be happy to cover just some highlights and give some folks a sense of what's...
Well, absolutely. For instance, it requires that every parent have a high school diploma. Well, hello, yep. I don't have a high school diploma. I went to college, also didn't graduate, but I'm just saying, and I've successfully homeschooled all my kids. So the idea that somehow parents have to be specifically educated
Yeah.
Unlike teachers, by the way, who now don't have to pass proficiency tests in the state of New Jersey. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yep.
the whole, it's sort of ludicrous on its face, but if they pass it, then all of a sudden you have to turn over your paperwork, ma'am, please. Paperwork.
Yep.
Give me your paperwork. I mean, come on, go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah,
It's
run down some of them.
Well, it's kind of like permission to parent. When we moved to West Virginia, we had to dig up I mean, I haven't looked for my high school diploma in ages. We've homeschooled in Colorado and, Texas and Alaska and Washington and foreign countries. And it's like, man, I'm digging up a high school diploma from decades ago just to teach my own kids. We've been doing it for 15 years already. And in fact, 42 states don't have any qualification requirement. So for 8 states, it would not be much of a change, but for 42, it would be a massive shift. There's a list of disqualifying offenses for criminal offenses, things that we would probably agree with. But there's also a catch-all provision that says, or any other crime not listed, if the superintendent determines basically that the child is at risk or that homeschooling is a bad idea. So you have this list of things that people would agree with, and then this catch-all phrase, which basically swallows anything that's on the list already.
And sorry, I'm going to butt in here
Yep.
because I want people to understand the reason that they put in this, hey, if you've ever been investigated for abuse or neglect, that's what they hide behind. We're just trying to look out for the best interests of the children. And then they throw in that or anything else that the superintendent might deem to be somewhat questionable, like if you didn't buy your child an Orange Julius when you were walking past the store, that's egregious and we can't allow that. So you shouldn't be allowed to homeschool. That's what this is. It's the Trojan horse. It's the nose of the camel getting under the tent. And you're like, but the camel's nose is cold. We should let the camel's nose under the tent. And then pretty soon you're not in the tent anymore. The camel is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Any investigation by CPS within the last 3 years would be grounds for denying or not allowing someone to homeschool. And so it's we deal with these kind of not necessarily bad people reporting, but I mean, I dealt with a case about a couple months ago where CPS was called on a family. Imagine a family who lives, their backyard backs up to like a public bike trail. Somebody's biking by, sees a little kid standing out on the back porch in, I think, their diaper, and it's winter, and it's a snapshot in time of about 2 seconds. The person calls CPS on the family. Next thing you know, this family is undergoing a CPS investigation because a bystander biked behind their home, saw this child, no idea what the context was, no idea if the child happened to walk out literally a half second before. And yet under the model bill, that family would be precluded from homeschooling because there's been an allegation of abuse or neglect. There's findings in there. So this is the type of ideas and really the risks that you see to a homeschool family. We deal with families all the time that are the subject of an investigation. And then, the other big provision you have in this, in addition to this abuse and neglect provision, is this idea of assessments. I mean, it's just rampant with assessments. 25% of the bill, 5 pages, is devoted to this idea of we need to assess the children. What kind of education are they getting? Can they even read? I mean, my son took the SAT. I mean, he scored higher than me in 10th grade. And I went to college on this score, and he's already beyond me. And yet, man, without the state, looking over Kevin and Wendy's shoulder, we have no idea what type of education they're getting. So, yeah, that's
and of course the ridiculousness of this is children can graduate in the state of Oregon without knowing how to read or do math, but they are still given a high school diploma. And proficiency for reading, for instance, in the state of Ohio is a 36% test score. Mm-hmm. So the idea that those people are better qualified to assess the advancements of the children is absolutely ludicrous. I reject it right on its face. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, they have a great deal of power, right?
That they do, and they would be given. I mean, the amount of power that this would grant to kind of a mid-level superintendent, a county superintendent, or a state is frankly unprecedented. I mean, they would have more power than they have in any state in the nation right now. And yeah, this idea that we need to have state oversight, and this is where the worldview comes in, and it's so critical. And I think people need to understand it. It's not just someone who has a different view of what homeschool should look like. They have a totally different view of what life should look like, about the world that we should live in.
Yes,
And
it's a
the
good
freedom
point.
that we enjoy as Americans. I mean, it's not just about, I mean, I want every kid in America to get a good education. I want the kid in Oregon and Wisconsin and Ohio that goes to public school. I want that kid to get a good education because I think the country is better when everyone gets a good education.
That
Um,
is, of course, the precept of why we have a school system in the first part, right?
presumably,
Is
presumably.
because in theory, the government wants an educated populace, but in practice, the government clearly doesn't want an educated populace.
Well, and it's, I mean, I look at the public school numbers and I mean, it's just sad to me
Yes,
because
it is sad.
we make a kid go to the school and sit there for whatever, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. We shuffle them through grades, even though there's minimal or no proficiency. And the reality is, and the reason homeschooling is flourishing and these other educational models that you see learning pods and micro schools is because they can actually give a tailored education to their kids. We can actually say, here's the kid. We don't have to sit him behind a desk. We don't have to lock him in a classroom. We can just let him learn and we can teach him. And the ability of children, I've been amazed as a homeschool dad, the ability of children to learn on their own and to grow and to flourish. I just imagine what all of those kids in other settings would do if they had the opportunity to go into an educational setting where they could flourish, because they're not dumb. They're not stupid. They're not behind. They don't need remedial training. They don't need remedial math. They just need an environment that lets them flourish. And so rather than addressing that issue, CRHE looking at that and saying, hey, maybe we ought to look at public education. Maybe we ought to not push kids forward that have the 30% reading proficiency. They say, no, let's look at the homeschool kids who have demonstrated proficiency and let's see what we can do to regulate them further. It's almost like we don't want them to be ahead, so let's try to bring them back, as if that's helpful to the country. So yeah, it's very backwards, and really
Well, I mean, it's driven by money. I think we need to fess up and understand that after decades of being trained in our schools that money is the highest value, we are now operating in a society that is driven primarily by money as the motivating factor. And
yeah.
As we're seeing with the Department of Education and the extreme misspending that's been happening, the fact that schools took COVID funds and redid their AstroTurf, or went on a vacation sent a bunch of administrators on a vacation to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas or what have you. I think it's time that we understand that the people who are running the institutions, or at least involved in the institutions, may not have the children's best interest at heart. And our schools have now become not places of education, but places of anti-education. They train children to hate learning instead of to embrace and enjoy learning. And and that's partly the reason that homeschoolers almost can't miss, that they almost can't miss at having a better outcome, because even if you hound your children with the academics all day long, you're not going to do it all day long. You're going to do it for 3 or maybe 4 hours a day. They're still going to have half a day to go and explore the world and enjoy themselves and understand that there's more to life than academics and stuff like that.
Well, and yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's why homeschool flourishes, is because we have a different model. And frankly, the system, and I use that broadly, the system, the big public education system, I mean, they simply don't have a category for it because they can't do it. I mean, there's no way you can do it. In fact, I'm actually sitting here in a hotel room in Bismarck, North Dakota. I spoke at a Capitol Day this morning, testified before the House Education Committee today. It was regarding an ESA bill that's pending that, explicitly includes homeschoolers. And, a superintendent got up and very honestly said, look, if I get a child who moves to my district and comes, I don't have the option to not take them. I mean, I have to take them, the ones who are excelling, the ones who are not excelling, the ones with good family backgrounds, the ones with, very challenging family backgrounds. And I resonate with that. I mean, what does he do with that? I mean, there's only so much that they can do. And yet, rather than trying to fix those systems to the extent they can be fixed, they're after homeschooling, and let's regulate homeschooling. There's an interesting article. It was from the Hillsdale and Primus I think it was maybe even a few years ago now, but it talked about the rise in spending and bureaucracy as opposed to the rise in teachers.
That was a good one.
It was
It's
very,
4 times the rate of inflation for
yeah,
college tuition, and something along those lines for undergraduate, or, pre, K through 12, basically.
yeah, yeah.
And we're paying a lot of administrators to
Mhm.
get a worse outcome than we had before. And I think it's because of the breakdown of the family. What do you think?
Oh, I think the breakdown of the family is is tragic, and it's contributing to all of this. And frankly, there's, and this is, if you look behind the CRHE in this model bill, you'll find that there are some serious, challenges that they had with their own family. And the reality is we don't teach people the truth. I went to a conference just a few months ago with Ian Rowe. He wrote a book called Agency, and he's with the American Enterprise Institute. But he basically said, how come we don't teach kids the truth? How come we don't tell kids that, look, and his kind of secret to success, if you tell kids that if they graduate from high school, get a full-time job, have kids after they're married, all right, get married, and
Okay.
then have children, they have
Right.
something like a 97 to 98% chance of not living in poverty. And yet he was amazed at the pushback that they got from the public education system, saying, you can't teach people that. You can't teach people that they should get married and then have children. You're propagating the family and values. And it's like, no, this is reality. It's
This
actually
is how, yeah, this is how you know that they don't have the children's best interests at heart.
right.
But they will say to children, college prep and career readiness, you better graduate high school and then you better go to college because, and I don't know who did the studies, but I imagine they did the studies that showed that college degrees earn more money over their lifetime than children without college degree, graduates, high school graduates without college degrees. That's no longer the case, but nobody's doing that study anymore because there's no
Right.
money in it. And
Right.
there's a lot of money in convincing a child to borrow money and hit their parents up to get them into a college that now costs, 4 times the price that it used to cost, or 4 times the inflation, the equivalent of inflation. It's really, it is sad. And I understand him saying, why don't we tell them the truth? But
Mm.
let's face it, they're lying to kids left, right, and center in schools. How do you groom a child if you can't lie to the child? You have to lie to the child in order to groom them.
Well, and what we see is, what we see in the Make Homeschool Safe Act is vestiges of that worldview, wanting
Yes.
to bring that into the homeschool community and saying, hey,
Right.
we actually don't trust parents at all. We need to make the state the purveyor and the guarantee and the safeguarder of all children in America. And we see this in other countries. In Europe, they have the Children's Wellbeing in Schools bill, which will create a national registry across England. And home educators are fighting that bill. But we see this statist mentality popping up all over the place. It just says, don't trust parents, trust the state, trust the government, trust us.
Right.
And I look at my own kids and I go, you don't know my kids from anybody. And
Right.
you're telling me I should trust you with my 8 children more
Or
than
they should trust them, right? Your children should
Right.
trust them, as
Right.
opposed to you, by the way,
Yeah.
which is the destruction of the family again. By the way, I have a comment here. The organization behind this seems to be bitter adults who were homeschooled incorrectly. A lot of them claim to have been homeschooled.
Yeah, it's the interesting part of this is the folks behind CRHE are have an aura of credibility with the homeschool community because they can testify to their own experiences, which gives them a different perspective. They can talk about it was like for them being homeschooled, and so it gives them a different vantage point to speak from, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that. But if you look at them, a lot of them were well educated. I mean, a lot of them got high school diplomas, went to college.
Right. They're the successes, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like their own success undermines the credibility that they have this horrific upbringing. I'm like, if it was so bad, then how come you're so successful in launching this company and being an entrepreneur, which we know homeschooling produces? But by and large, if you boil it down, it's really a group of people that disagreed with their Christian upbringing and didn't like it and have moved on from that or rejected the faith that their parents tried to teach them, and don't want other kids to have to experience that. It's either that, or you have a group of people that say, I had a great homeschool experience, but I'm concerned about the children who aren't having a good homeschool experience. And so that's why they would jump on board. So yeah, as whoever the commenter, looked at, it's like, yeah, these are homeschool graduates that by and large, they're actually doing very well, many with graduate degrees. But they're concerned about their own upbringing, and they don't want other people to have to go through whatever they think they experienced that was so poor.
Right. So let me just say, lots of children go to school, are bullied, have a horrible, horrible outcome. And these people don't seem to be concerned about those kids. They're only focused on the homeschoolers whose outcomes tend to be 25 percentile points better on academic testing, which is their metric. I don't say that it's the right metric, but it's the metric that they use.
Sure.
And then finally, this kind of bill, even if you want to say, you know what, I don't mind that they require the immunizations for homeschoolers that they require for the kids to go to school, even though arguably the homeschoolers are sequestered because they're home. Even if you sort of don't have a problem with some of the things in this model legislation, you ought to have a problem with the idea that the government can infringe on your rights as a parent. And this is what this does. It infringes and it opens the door. And I think that's probably the best thing that we could say about it, is that at the very least, it's egregious in the sense that it is an infringement on rights. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And, and it's not academic in nature. Some people may be prone to think, oh, it's a model bill. What's really the risk if it just stays a model bill? We saw the religious exemption bill in Virginia, be introduced that, was defeated over time, that would have removed that religious exemption. There's a massive bill in Illinois with HB 28.7. My colleague Will Estrada is there to testify tomorrow. Over 34,000 witness slips were submitted in opposition to the original bill. There's an amendment that's been proposed, which doesn't do anything good for homeschoolers. So I want people to know that this is actually taking root in some state legislatures. I mean, there are representatives that are implementing portions of this bill, not in its entirety, but they're taking the worldview behind it and they're using it to actually try to impact homeschool laws in their state. So this is not pie in the sky academia. This is nuts and bolts happening in state legislatures right this very moment. So, and don't think that because you may live in a state with a great homeschool law now, that it can't change. I mean, it can absolutely change, and it can change very quickly if we're not vigilant, if we don't pay attention and think that, think that we can just sit by and, we got freedom today, so we'll have it tomorrow. I hope so, but not if we stop paying attention.
Not how it works. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I have to touch on this because in my state, in Florida, we have the PEP funds, which are basically ESA's education savings account, or a scholarship fund that funds the parents. And we've got homeschoolers signing up left, right, and center for these funds. The first year there were 0 strings attached. That was the selling point. The second year they said, oh, but we need testing, so you'll have to test your child. And I do know one mom who just withdrew her kid, like, okay, then keep the money because we're not testing. But there are a lot of parents that are going along with that. Can you just speak briefly to the dangers there?
Yeah, the dangers are real. And I think you actually have to look at just human nature I mean, I don't know about you, but if I moved, let's take Arizona, we'll move it out of Florida because that's where you are, but go to Arizona, $7,000 a kid. Kevin Boden and Wendy moved to Tucson with our 7 school-age children. They pay us almost $50,000 a year. Now, it takes a lot of willpower after 5 years of getting $50,000 to say no to the money that has changed the way you live just because they're going to impose a test. So I commend this mom for doing it. I think it's probably very, very rare that a mom would do that. And these things do change over time. They simply don't go back. The other thing that I'll highlight, let me share an anecdotal story, Sam. So I flew to Phoenix last month for a Capitol Day. I call my Uber from the airport. I'm going to my hotel, and the Uber driver asks, hey, what are you doing in town? And I tell him, I work with HSLDA. There's a Capitol Day going on tomorrow that we're homeschool advocates for freedom. First comment out of his mouth, I heard that they pay you to homeschool here. I mean, that's the narrative. It's just, it will become part of the air that is breathed with these programs that, oh, that big homeschool community, those 5-6 million kids that are homeschooled and growing over the years, the dominant narrative will be in most states where these pass, those parents are funded by the government to homeschool their children. I don't think it's a helpful narrative. And in fact, if you go to Alaska, another anecdotal story, there are many representatives in that state who, not to their detriment, but don't even know that independent homeschooling even exists, because 80+% of people that call themselves homeschoolers are actually enrolled in a government-funded system. I mean, it changes the homeschool community, even for the people that aren't in it. And
so let me speak to that just briefly, because I want people to understand that when you get money from the government, and the government has to approve where you spend the money, and if the government doesn't have to approve it, that's taxation without representation. That is very bad oversight of your tax dollars by the government to just willy-nilly send the money to parents, right? So the government has to step in and say, well, let me see what you plan to do with the money, and then we can approve it. When that happens, those government funds, wherever they go, they make that entity, whatever that entity is, a government-funded entity. So you will no longer have private schools, because that money will go to the quote unquote private schools, and those private schools then become government funded schools. And it will be the death of the private education initiative in the country, frankly.
Well, and to connect it to the Make Homeschool Safe Act, as you fund those things, and as the fiscal, transparency increases, what I see is they pull out provisions from the Make Homeschool Safe Act and say, oh, you're looking for a way to assess kids and make sure they're educated? We got 5 pages of options for you. And oh, by the way, because 80% of them are already funded, this is just really fiscal responsibility. I mean, this is just accountability.
Yes, we just have to do it. By the way, for safety, your private school has to insist that every child is fully vaccinated, including with the newest one that hasn't been tested. But sure, give that to kids. And if you don't want to, that's fine. We'll just withdraw the funding.
Yes, I mean, I encourage parents to just think through the folks that fought for home education freedom back in the 80s and 90s, and I wasn't one of them. I'm the recipient of these freedom fights 4 decades ago, and I'm so thankful for their sacrifice and their hard work. And one of the ways I can honor that is by trying to keep it free, by them going to the state and saying, we're not looking for a handout, we're just looking for freedom. Well, don't turn around now as a second-generation home educator and look for the handout. Just be content with the freedom that has been earned over the course of decades, and be satisfied with that. Do a good job educating your kids. If the money is available to you, turn it down. We can get the Hope Scholarship in West Virginia. We don't participate because I want homeschool to be free for my kids and my grandkids. And this is one way that we can do it. It's one way that we can reject things like the Make Homeschool Safe Act and these attempts to regulate us and make us wards of the state. So it all kind of comes together when you think about it. These aren't isolated things. They really do contest well with one another.
Well, Kevin, thank you for standing firm and also being an example for people. Kevin has a lot of kids, 8 now, and turns down the money. That's a lot of money that you're walking away from. And because I know you went to school, I know you went to public school, you people out there, and I did too, and we all learned that money was the highest value. It's not. That's a lie that's meant to destroy your family. So I think we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you coming on with me. Thank you so much for walking us through some of this model legislation. Just pay attention, folks. If you're in Illinois, please sign your witness papers, to send them in. And thanks for everything that you do, Kevin. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you. Thanks for what you do.
You too. Remember, speak truth, speak it boldly, everyone. We'll see you later.